Varmt välkomna till Hjärnskakningspodden där vi diskuterar allt som har att göra med just hjärnskakningar. Jag delar med mig av information, erfarenheter och intervjuer där vi diskuterar det här ämnet. Mitt namn är Viktor Bull. Jag är legitimerad fysioterapeut med särskilt intresse för just hjärnskakningar. Och kom ihåg att innehållet i den här podden inte ersätter bedömning av legitimerad sjukvårdspersonal. Jag sitter nu här med en gäst från andra sidan sundet. Man skulle kunna säga, det är inte jättemånga som arbetar med hjärnskakningar i Sverige. Det är inte jättemånga som arbetar med det i Danmark. Men jag tror att de två som arbetar heltid med det sitter just nu i samma rum. För med mig så har jag en fysioterapeutkollega från Köpenhamn som heter Morten Karl som driver både en podcast på danska precis som vi gör men också Instagram-kontot Hjärnerystelsesfysen. Varmt välkommen Morten, och vi kommer ju ta detta på engelska, so I will shift to English. We both speak Danish because you are from Denmark, obviously, and I lived in Denmark for 2 years. So until now, this morning, we've been speaking Danish. But for the sake of our listeners, we'll keep it to English. But very much welcome to Sweden and this podcast.
Thank you for having me, Victor. Actually, I think the name of my company, Hjärnerystelsesfysen, is the same as yours, but in Swedish. That's
exactly.
A fun fact.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me.
And we've had some contact through Instagram, but today is the first day that we actually meet and you visit our clinic. But just to give the listeners a view of where you come from, who is Morten Karl and why do you work with concussion?
Yeah, so the story actually starts quite some time ago, I would say. Until about 18 years old, I played a lot of different sport. Specifically football, but when I was 18 years old, I sprained my ankle quite badly. It was actually what we call a medial sprain, a sprain of the ligaments of the inside of the ankle, which is actually quite rare because there are 3 ligaments on the outside and 4 on the inside. So normally you sprain the outside of your ankle. But I was out for quite some time, and I was not playing at any high level. But so when I came back after rehabbing my ankle, there was nothing you didn't talk about load management at that time. So I just started full training the week I returned. So then I got some knee pain and groin pain. So when I was about 18 years old, I had to stop playing football. So because at that time football was quite a big thing in my life, of course I went to different physios to get help. But I could not find any physios that could help me return to football. So therefore, I wanted to be a physio myself, to be the person I was missing in my journey. And actually, 10 years later, I played football again. Then Corona came, and then I stopped, and now I'm a father, and my wife is actually pregnant with twins. So the reason to become a physio was because I didn't get the right help with my ankle sprain in the beginning, I would say. So that's...
Isn't that the story of all physiotherapists? Yeah, I had an injury, I didn't get any help, now I want to help others.
I think
right?
so, I think so, yeah.
But until yesterday, I thought that your interest for concussion came from that you, just as me, that you were concussed during sports, but that's not the case.
No, actually not. I got my concussion. I was working in a professional football club in Denmark, and I did it myself. I opened a door up, hitting me in the front of my head. Mm-hmm. Got a concussion back in 2020, I think it was. Then I lost my job, was out for a couple of years without being able to work. I think we will talk about it later in this podcast, but I didn't find anyone really who could help me. Maybe I found one doctor that helped me doing sub-symptom threshold exercise, but beside that, I did not really find anyone who could help me. So I had to search the literature myself to find, the answers to my problems. and that was where my real interest in concussion really began. So no, I was just at work, not in sport.
So this was in 2020.
Yeah.
This concussion.
Yeah.
And that caused so much symptoms that you weren't able to work for how long? How was your life looking?
So at that time I was the head physiotherapist in Lyngby Boldklub. It's called in the best league in Denmark. Then I was on sick leave for I continued working for the first month, but got more and more symptomatic. And then I was on sick leave for about half a year. Then I returned slowly, but I got fired. That's how it is in that business. Then actually I recovered quite well and got a new job in Denmark as the head physiotherapist in the academy in a club called Brøndby. That is I would say, second biggest, maybe third biggest club in Denmark. But there was too much pressure and my brain head was not ready for that load. So then I got fired again. And then my wife got pregnant, and so about maybe 2.5 years, I had my symptoms after my concussion. Yeah.
How does that affect you today, meeting patients when you yourself weren't able to work? How did that affect you as a person, and how you view this kind of injury?
Normally when we talk about concussion, there are, some people say, 22 main symptoms. If you look at the symptoms in the SCAT-6 tool, I had all those symptoms. So when I meet patients, I know what they're going through. And I think that also, I think if you use it the right way, then it can be a good thing to have had a concussion yourself. But in the concussion space, at least in Denmark, there are a lot of anecdotes, and you should be very careful. Oh, it helped me eating orange or ginger or something like that. I'm not working with a concussion in that sense. I'm working with an evidence-based approach. But I think the way I'm using my own story, I'm using it in a good way, I would say.
Can imagine. But you had one concussion, and you had symptoms for many years.
Yes.
Because that is something that was quite strange for me at one point, because all you read about is mostly the NHL players, the football players, the boxers. They've had multiple concussions, that had multiple hits to the head, hundreds and thousands of hits to the head, and no wonder that they have symptoms for so long. But you had only one concussion. What did you think about that back then?
So also what we can see in the literature is how you approach or rehab the concussion is in the beginning is very important. And the first couple of days, I had a mild headache where the door hit me in the head. Maybe I felt a little bit off, but I was not sure I had a concussion. Then I was actually selling my apartment at that time, and I had to do some cleaning and stuff. So 3 or 4 days later, I had a lot of symptoms, during the cleaning process. And then I was, okay, I got a concussion. But at that time, in the football club I was working in, we had some very important games coming up. So there was no time to, go on sick leave or work less hours. So the first month, I got more and more symptoms. I saw double, had a fever all the time, could not sleep, and so on. And then it was like also what you hear with people suffering from stress. Then I got my sick leave, boom, all the symptoms came with full power, even more symptoms that I had. And after that,
when you went on sick leave?
Yes, when I went on sick leave.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of symptoms at work, and I was thinking it cannot get worse than this, but it could. And after that period, I had about, maybe there were depression too, but 3 months where I was lying in my bed, I would say 22 hours a day. Not because I didn't want it to do stuff, but I had so many symptoms. At that time, I just moved in with my now wife, And I remember just looking in her eyes, focusing on them for a couple of seconds, gave me a terrible headache. So at that time, I had rehabbed about 50 professional football players with concussion. So I know quite a lot about the injury at that time, actually, but it's something different to have a concussion yourself. And I had so many symptoms. I think the timing was not the best. The what do you call that? Physical trainer at the football club. His wife had just given birth, so he was not at the club at that time. So I also had his role to fill out. That might have been part of the picture, and I think I got a depression too. That can be answer to it.
But you said that you had been rehabbing players for many years for their concussions as well. But how did that affect your process? What did you tell the players to do when they had their concussion that maybe you didn't do, or was it something like that?
So maybe I should start a little bit about, because I think it will answer the question, my interest in concussion. So back in 2015, I started to study to become a physio. And when I had been studying for about 2 months, I got my first job as a student in a handball club. And then one of the players, first training or second I was in the club, he got a concussion. At that time, I had no knowledge about it at all. I think I saw concussion as what they call in the old days a bell ringer. You know, you get your bell rung, get some symptoms, rest, cocoon therapy, lay in a dark room, just sit it out or wait it out. So I remember the day he got his concussion. We went directly to a dark room, shut off all the lights. Was there for an hour or two until his mom came and went to the emergency with him. And then he recovered. I did not really rehab him. He was just home for some time, and then he came back, and everything was fine. But then 2 years later, in 2017, I came to FC Copenhagen when I was still studying to become a physio. I think most Swedish people know that club. And at that time, the consensus statement from Berlin just came out with the SCAT-5 at that time. So we had a quite, I would say, active approach to concussion. But the difference is that the professional football players, when they get home, you know they're off. When you work as a physio in a professional football club, you meet in early and you go home late. It's not how it is for the players, and they get all the right treatment. So in my case, I neglected my symptoms the first months. I would never do that with a football player. So I think that is the difference. Most people recover within 3 weeks in a quite big paper when you talk about sport. So I don't see those people with persistent symptoms. Really, I had a couple of players, but I think that is one of the main difference. And then when I got my own concussion and I was on sick leave and I got a lot of symptoms, I went to the different public service offers. And they just told me to rest and wait it out. So I did the opposite with the football players. But then I remember a specific one person who was presented to me as maybe the person in Denmark who knows most about concussion. And she was like, you have to rest a lot and don't do anything that increases your symptoms. So wasn't this, position. I used to rehab concussion this way. Now the main expert, maybe in Denmark, says do the opposite. So, I was in this situation that I did not know what to do.
And as you say that most of the players that you had, they recovered spontaneously within a few days or even a few weeks.
Exactly.
So when you yourself, you have a lot of symptoms after many weeks, then it can get confusing, I think.
Yeah, and then I went to an expert who told me you will never be the same again. At that time, I have
perfect.
Perfect, right? I'd had symptoms for 2 months at that time. It was the expert I talked about before. you will never recover, and if you will get better, you will maximum be able to work 20 hours, she told me. And I did not know anything about concussion in that sense. So yeah, that made me quite
But tell me more about that, because that is very interesting. That you got worse when you got on sick leave. I know that that's possible, of course, but it's very important for people to know that, because many people are on sick leave. And it's not bad that you can go on sick leave. For many people, it's necessary for quite some time. But tell me more about that. How could it be that you had a brain injury, you went to work, you were feeling bad, and when you stopped pushing yourself, when you started being home, you got worse? How could we explain that to patients?
I think one of the main way people normally explain it is that cortisol, adrenaline, and so on, these normally called stress hormones. I don't like that word, actually. I like to call them activity hormones normally, but they can, blur some of the symptoms. I think that could be one of the reasons. We know I would say in some of the literature, and also from other diagnoses, that if you can continue working maybe less hours, that is a great thing to do. But that was not possible in that job I had at that time.
Could it also be a identity crisis as well that gave you some stress? How do you view that?
In the beginning, I did not see it as an identity crisis, I would say. No, I would not. That came later on, but in the beginning, I was just very scared. I got my concussion in October, and then in December we went on vacation, and actually I had a quite good holiday at Christmas, and then on New Year's Day, I think it was, I got a lot of symptoms back, and I called the boss, not the boss, but the head coach at Lyngby Boldklub at that time. He has been in the club for many years. And he told me, if you're not returning to work tomorrow, you will get fired. So then I started with a lot of symptoms again. And then after a week or two, it was too much. And then, of course, some identity crisis. But it's not because I see anything wrong about saying I was depressed or anxiety and so on. But not at that time. I just had a lot of symptoms, and they did not disappear. That was,
But how did your recovery look? What was the main key factor for recovering in your case? What did you find out?
Yeah, in the beginning, I had so much symptoms. So just looking at my phone or hearing a podcast, I could not really. So I was lying in bed, tried to do some walking and stuff. Tried to do some breath work, but none of that really helped. And just all of a sudden, 3 months in to my sick leave, it changed. Then, I don't know why exactly, even to this date. But then I found a Canadian podcast, actually. I think a lot of people hearing this podcast guess they know that as well. And he was different from what I have heard from the Danish experts. You have to push yourself, and it's okay to get symptoms and be physical active and so on. And that changed my mindset. And then I would say I found the key. And then I was like, okay, this is going to take some time, but I know what to do. So that is a short story. So in the beginning, my rehab was not really rehab. That was laying in bed, wait for it to pass. But then I got a little bit better, so I could hear that podcast, and I heard all the episodes 4 times through, I think. And then changed quite a lot, and then I got better, and I could read the literature myself, and so on. Yeah,
can imagine. But after your recovery, you started working more and more with concussion. How did that journey look?
So I don't know if it is like that here in Sweden, but we have a lot of Facebook groups for people with concussion in Denmark.
It's the same.
It's the same. And I went to those groups. I had symptoms myself, but I knew more about concussion than the people in the groups did, of course, because I'm a healthcare professional and I used to work with concussion. So when they ask questions, I answer them and use quite a lot of time to do that. And people, I think, quite early found out he knows quite a lot about this subject. So they wrote a direct message to me in Messenger chat. And then I told them there was also a way to rehab myself. I can give you a call. You don't have to pay anything for it. And I can, teach you about concussion and stuff. So that was actually the way I rehabbed my own brain, you can say. So I think I had 200 or 300 phone consultations. And I got better and better and better. And then I also got more and more experience in helping people also with not just a sport concussion, but with persistent symptoms or prolonged symptoms, what you call it. And then at some point in time, I was almost 100% recovered. And then I started hjernerystelsesfysen 2.5 years ago. So it took 2.5 years for me to recover fully. Yeah.
Cool. So you started out with phone consultations for free to start with to become really, really good at it. But now you've developed so you have a physical clinic, as I understand, or how to say normal day look for you now?
So in the beginning when I started the company, it was only me.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of these online or phone consultations, and they worked very well. So when I started my company, I think, okay, tomorrow people will call me all day to get a consultation, but that did not happen, actually. I think one thing is I gave it for free, and some patients in Denmark don't have that much economy because they've been sick maybe it's not a disease, but had symptoms for quite some time and are not able to work. But I had these phone consultations, and I saw maybe I had 5 clients the first month or 7 the next, but it went quite slow, and I think I had something special to offer. But then sometime a lot of the people I was helping over the phone asked if I had a physical place, a clinic they could visit. So then I called an old friend of mine who I knew from the football industry. He has a quite famous clinic in Copenhagen, if I could be there. Yeah. So then I started up 1 day a week with physical consultations, and then 2 times a week, and then it got a little bit, I did not get more clients. It was quite stable, or what you call it. And then in the end of March last year, there came a podcast out in Denmark where a journalist travels to United States to get help at a concussion clinic. And then on my Instagram, I did a post about that podcast. I wrote something about, I don't think you should go to United States. We have something to offer here in the private, at least, service in Denmark. And that went in the concussion world quite viral, I would say. And then 2 weeks after, I think it was, I had 50 people on waitlist. And then I hired my first employee, what you call it. And then it has just been rolling since that. So right now we are 5 people beside me. Actually, I have a talk with a new employee later today, so then 6. So we have physical clinics in most of the bigger cities in Denmark. We still have the online or telephone consultations. I think that is about actually 50% maybe of what we're helping people with. We have a concussion acute line that is open all year, every day. Then I am also teaching. In Denmark we have Hjernerystelsesforeningen, where I'm teaching online courses in sub-symptom threshold exercise. So a normal day, if that was your question in the beginning, it varies quite a lot. At the moment, I see or consultate with about 10 to 15 concussed people each week. That is not that many compared to some of my colleagues. But then I have a podcast myself, Hjernerystet, it's called. Then I'm teaching courses also in Denmark. Have a lot of meetings, and also with what do you call that? Forsikringsselskaber.
Insurance companies.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So 10 or 15 a week, 10 physical at the clinic. I work 5 hours on Tuesday and 5 on Friday. Yeah, with no breaks, just 5 hours with patients. And then I have maybe 1-2 on telephone during the day. And then I have a lot of meetings and have a course you also have to plan. That takes quite some time.
It does. It takes more time than you could imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also like that because in the beginning you think that, it's a brain injury. You have to always meet the patient in person in physical meetings, but you can do a lot through telephone, through online Zoom meetings.
I would actually say that we have had some statistic on it at my company. We don't really see a difference if people are in et forløb journey with us over the phone or physical. There is not really any difference, except if people have BPPV.
Exactly. Kristallösel in Swedish.
Kristallösel. But we can screen for those things over the phone. And sometimes we can send them a video of the Dix-Hallpike. So we don't see a difference, actually. But if I should return to the podcast with the journalist traveling to the United States, he was like, he did not get the right treatment in Denmark. No one knows about concussion in Denmark. You have to travel to the United States, to the UPMC in Pittsburgh. And that podcast, even my local barber has heard it, who knows nothing about. Yeah, it went viral. And because he's a famous journalist, he went to all the newspapers and so the thing that has happened, it actually ended quite good for me because I did a post about it and then a lot of clients came to me. But in the United States, they are talking a lot about these subtypes of concussion, they call it. They say, like there are different kind of knee injuries, ligament, cartilage, and so on. You can have different kind of concussion. And then you have to do a lot of specific tests, cognitive test, ocular test of the vision to find out which subtypes you're dominant in. And then you have to get a very, very specific, some very specific exercises to rehab the specific dysfunction you have. And that is not what the research suggests at all. But that is one of the things I'm struggling a bit with, to get people to understand you don't have to do 50 different tests at all. So that is one of the problems we are facing, but we are expanding and so on. So we do something right, and I have, as you too, a big in this industry, big Instagram page where I write about the research and so on, and a podcast as well.
So even if it wasn't the best information in that particular podcast, then it was a good opportunity for you to reach out to more people.
It was not when I did the Instagram post in the first place where I commented on this podcast. Actually, I did not comment on the podcast. I just wrote about, I don't think you should go to the United States. It was not to get more clients. I was not thinking about it, but it went rival. And then, a lot of insurance companies heard about me, and my Instagram grow and so on. So if we say that 30 to 40% of all people getting a concussion will have persistent symptoms, meaning symptoms more than a month. And then in Denmark, we all the time hear 25,000 people get a concussion each year. And that is not correct at all. That came from a study back in 1996 where the diagnosis criteria were different. We did not know that much about concussion as we do now. There came out a quite big cohort study in Canada some years back, showing incidence of 1.2% of the population each year, which would be around 70,000
in Denmark.
People, each year. Where did I come from? Where did I start?
we talked about the U.S. and Pittsburgh and and you growing.
Oh yeah. So out of those 70,000 people, 40% of those get persistent symptoms, and only about those people with persistent symptoms, 0.5%, maybe less, end up traveling to United States. Yeah. So it's not. It is such a small number that has any benefit from hearing about United States. Instead, what people think is, I can never recover because I have to travel and I don't have the money. Okay. So it's not about the podcast specific, but the history about you have to travel there. Yeah. I'm very much against, and I write quite a lot about it on LinkedIn, also on the Instagram page, because that is not true. I cannot help everyone who comes to me, but then I have a friend or a colleague that can. You don't have to go to United States. It's a couple of, is it a month back or so, something like that, two of the people from that place in Pittsburgh, Collins and Contos.
Yeah, you were on a lecture with them. Yeah, I read about that.
It was the worst lecture I've ever witnessed working with concussion. I have been at, 50 lectures, maybe more. I remember a phrase that said something like, if people after concussion has a migraine and they're resting in bed, then they're weak. I remember Collins said that. He also said that if you throw up during exercise after your concussion, you will just continue. And it was that so American, Trump
I can imagine
all the time. And then they said a lot of wrong things about studies, and it was very pseudo-scientific, I would say, very American. So I actually have had some clients who went to the United States before this American wave, as I used to call it. USA-bølgen was in the medias. Some of them got better, some did not. But what I can see from my own, from talking with these people, is that the ones who had a lot of fear avoidance, was afraid to do specific things, they will get pushed in the United States. And some people, I think, actually behind the fear avoidance, there are no concussion back. Those people will recover quite fast if they just expose. That is the pattern I have seen. But the people who have a good sleep hygiene, are physical active, graded exposure to things, they will not benefit from going to the United States at all. That is what I think. Yeah.
Because this is quite interesting, because I'm not active in these concussion groups in Sweden, but I hear a lot about them. I see a lot of people send me links and screenshots of everything, but I'm not that active because I don't want to.
I'm not active anymore.
No, I know. I know you talked about that in your podcast with Ronnie.
Yeah.
You used to be active, but it's so hard having a scientific discussion in that forum. Yeah. But here in Sweden, well, I've heard about some people going to Pittsburgh. I've heard some people talking about it, but when I saw you writing about it on Instagram, I thought, is it that many that talks about it? But in Sweden, not.
No,
but maybe
that is because of the podcast.
Yeah.
Because of
this journalist.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was this is it will pass with time. People will forget about the United States.
Yeah,
but no. It just continues. And then it's not because I don't like the journalist in general, but he has all the right contacts with the newspapers. So then once in a while they post about one more person went to the United States, get better, and so on. So it just
it keeps growing.
Yeah, it keeps growing. I think at UPMC in Pittsburgh, they see 20,000 people with concussion each year, I was told at the conference I was at. And I think they said about 300 people from Denmark went to their place the last couple of years. So let's say 100 persons each year. I don't know how many it is in Sweden. It's quite hard to find out, I think. But yeah, that is not that many. If 70,000 Danish people get a concussion.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But how do you view concussion care? I know that I would say that I would like to go back in time, maybe 3 or 4 years, and tell my patients back then, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said, because now I know better. And probably in 10 years, I would like to go back to 2025 and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong back then. But that is a good sign, I think, that you try your best to work evidence-based. And I know that you do. But how do you view not maybe the US side of it, but how do you view Danish concussion care in general?
So we have private actors and we have the public service offers, maybe you call it that. The problem at the moment is not that there's not knowledge in Denmark, but people cannot find the people who need to help them. And we know with a diagnosis as concussion is that early, getting help early is quite a good thing if you want to recover quite fast. In some of the cities or kommuner in Denmark,
it's the same.
They have now actually concussion. What do you call that? Concussion coordinators. People who know all about the public's offers in that city.
Yeah, and try to send the right patient the right way.
But the doctors don't know they exist. So we have some public offers, but people don't know about them. I remember a patient I had who is living in Aarhus a couple of months back. I talked with her, and she has had the symptoms for quite some time. They have 2 concussion. What did I call them before? Coordinators in Aarhus. Yeah. She did not know anything about that. So I think that is one of the main problems we're facing. And then we're also facing that, I think it is the same in Sweden, but some of the people who work with concussion in Denmark, they do a lot of strange exercises, and I was talking about the subtypes. A lot of tests, and this movement of your eyes is insufficient. You have to do this specific exercise, and that is a problem. But I think that is all over the world. We have but we have private actors in Denmark who knows quite a lot about concussion, as I do, but not in all islands in Denmark. We don't. So you have to live the right place, and you have to know who can help you. And of course, social media can be a good or bad thing, but for us, a good thing, because then people hear about us. Yeah.
So besides, let's say you talk a lot about the coordinators, that you have the coordinators, but maybe they don't send the patient the right way, in the right direction. But if they did, let's say that the patients did get the correct direction, is it that in general, when you meet up with a healthcare professional in Denmark, do you get the correct advice or not?
There are some people in Denmark who knows a lot about concussion, as myself. But there are also a lot of people who think they know a lot about concussion that do not. It can be the old doctor who has told people the last 50 years, rest in a dark room. Last year, a group of people in Denmark, we have something called a borgerforslag, where you can vote. And if 20,000 people has voted, it will be sent to the politicians. And what they wanted to have changed in Denmark was they wanted to have these multidisciplinary places where a concussed person can go. But I think the problem is we don't have enough people in Denmark at the moment who knows enough about concussion. So it depends on where you're living in Denmark, and the coordinators, as I mentioned before, they don't know in general. They know nothing about concussion. And that is also one of the problems. So it is hard getting people to find the right people to help them in Denmark. That is the problem. But we have people in Denmark who knows what they're doing and have an evidence-based approach. But finding those places is the hardest part.
Because I don't think that it wouldn't take that much to make a huge difference. I think that correct information right away, very important, but also for those people who doesn't get better, even though they got the correct information, that they have a place to go to. That, okay, here's the information. Do you feel calm? Yeah. They say, I know what to do. A few weeks passed, and they feel that I'm not getting any better, and that they know where to go to if that happens.
In Denmark, the Sundhedsstyrelsen Health, what do you call that? We call it Sundhedsstyrelsen, the one who makes all the rules.
Yeah, Socialstyrelsen in
Sweden. They don't see concussion as a brain injury. And I think if that changed, in Denmark, if you get cancer, you can get help right away. But because we don't, and if you get a moderate or severe traumatic brain injury, you will get help right away.
Cool.
But because concussion is not fra Sundhedsstyrelsen seen as a mild traumatic brain injury, you don't at the moment get the right help. And what end up happening is that you went maybe to some of these Facebook groups and, I got a concussion a month ago, I'm not getting better. And then people are recommended, go see a craniosacral therapist or a lot of people who do passive. They have that has a passive. It's called approach to concussion. And if you get a stroke, a bleed, for example, in your brain, you will have a very active approach. And I think if that changed in Denmark, if we saw it as a brain injury without the nocebo to it, then we are a long way. But because then people would not go to the local massage therapist, they would do active rehab.
Exactly.
So that is one of the main things we also facing.
But I think there's two things to that, because people say that, well, I went to my doctor and my doctor said that I should just rest. How could that be? And I said, well, it's not your doctor's fault, because that's what they were taught. And that's what we were taught, you and me, in the beginning. Yeah. Until just recently. I say recently, it's a couple of years only. But I think that the reason why it's so hard to change is, one, it's what they've been taught until very recently. And two, even though you give the wrong advice, it ends up well for most people. Exactly. So even though we have 1,000 concussion patients, we give the worst advice, which is go rest in a dark room. Most of them will feel fine.
Yeah, 80% maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's also one of the problems. Well, I don't think it's been a bad advice, because I've given it to hundreds of people and they all recovered, right?
Yeah, and that is what we call a confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So that is one of the problems also with the Facebook groups. Oh, last week a person went to this group, she got a concussion, she rested in a dark room, she's fine now. And then the people in the group, they're maybe writing that, I continued working, and that is the reason why I'm still having symptoms today. Exactly. And because most people, 80%, maybe more, with all these hidden numbers, recover without any intervention, really. We think, a confirmation bias. She was resting cocoon therapy, as we call it. She recovered fully. That is the approach to do. And what people get told, even to this state, is if they lay in a dark room for 2 weeks, they still have symptoms, continue laying in a dark room. So I'm not after the doctors, because how should they know They have to know a lot about different diagnoses.
Exactly.
So
they're
it's
ruling out life dangerous
society thing, where Sundhedsstyrelsen og Socialstyrelsen, as you call them, they are the problem, in my opinion. Maybe the politicians, but again, how should they know anything about concussion?
No.
So I think it starts there. And even if you ask ChatGPT, is concussion a brain injury? It will say yes. It's so easy to find out it is. We don't have these neurological deficits as we see in stroke, where people can move their arm or can speech. But it's
or MRI findings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have the insurance companies that don't trust the people because they don't see anything on an MRI. So I think Sundhedsstyrelsen is the biggest problem.
Yeah, I'm having in a few weeks, I hope to have a lawyer on the podcast who had a lecture in Stockholm when I was there. A fantastic lecture. He works full time helping people in court regarding insurance companies. I had promised people that I would have a podcast episode a few weeks ago with him, but he got ill, and then I couldn't make it. So we tried to. He will try to come down to Malmö. We have a talk about that, but he has a lot to tell because he had a lecture where they said, well, if there's no findings on a CT scan, then maybe that's it. Maybe you've already lost. Yeah. When we know that concussion cannot be diagnosed with a CT scan.
Yeah, it is written in the diagnosis criteria. If you find something, we don't call it a concussion. We call it a traumatic brain bleed, for example.
Yeah.
So he's exactly right, and that is also one of the problems. People get gaslight or lit, or what you call it. The insurance companies don't get them any money because you did not lose your consciousness, for example, an old myth. So that is also one of the problems, that the insurance companies, the laws they're following are also old. They should be changed. So that is one of the problems too.
And then also it's much easier to motivate passive treatments like resting because, you're not pushing them too hard, at least. Because I know many patients that say that my doctor's so stupid because she told me to be active. She told me to go back to work. She told me to work out, and I tried, and I got even worse. So that is also a problem, that people say they have a bad experience from being told to try to be active. How do you view that?
Yeah, in the podcast I was talking about with the journalist traveling to the United States, he used a phrase called attack, attack, attack. That was what he was taught in the United States. Ignore your symptoms. That is not the way to go. Maybe if it is only about fear avoidance, maybe it can work out for some people. So how do you see it? There are a phrase, don't remember it exactly, from I think it's Peter O'Sullivan, who says, if you use avoidance to cope with your situation, you lose your life or life quality. I think, of course, you can do too much and you can do too little. But I actually think in the end, doing too little is a bigger problem. So doing more, yes, maybe you will get more symptoms, but you will be active, see your friends, and so on. But of course, we want to be somewhere in the middle. I understand, the thinking about I did too much. I got a lot worse. Maybe you did not do too much. Maybe you just analyzed, okay, my symptom increased, therefore I was doing too much. Maybe it could also be something about that. I think doing too little is, if you have to set them up against each other, is worse to do.
It's better to do a little bit too much than a little bit too little.
I would say so.
I agree. I usually say that in primary care, I think that the biggest change, I think, is that people are afraid of concussions. They should view it as a ankle sprain. Okay, if you go to the doctor or the physical therapist in primary care, they're not concussion specialists. No. They're not ankle specialists. They are in general specialists. What they should view it is that, okay, this is a concussion. It's not something worse, at least, thank goodness. But what you should do is treat it like a ankle sprain. What do you do with an ankle sprain? You don't rest for
No.
a couple but you don't run on it the next day. What do? You walk. You take a few steps. So I think that people view it as something much, much different than any other injury.
I remember I had a lecture a couple of months ago in Denmark, some place in Idrætshøjskole, about concussion, and the teachers, they're not a physiotherapist. They know a lot about weightlifting and handball and so on. And one of the teachers said at one time, "Oh, you're telling me to rehab it the same way as you do with the musculoskeletal injuries." Exactly. And I heard a phrase once, a person in Denmark said, concussion has to be rehabbed as a broken leg. No, because a broken leg has this inactivity period. Yeah. It is the same as a sprained ankle. When I used to work with professional football players full time, if a person sprained his ankle, maybe he would get a compression, maybe ice on. Then the day after, he would go to the swimming pool, do stuff in the water. If he could do that, he would go running on sand and doing a change of direction. If he could do that, he went back to the pitch. And most people with an ankle sprain are rehabbed, returned fully to competition within 1 to 2 weeks. If you look in the literature, it says in meta-analysis that after a year, if a person sprained his or her ankle, 20 to 40% will still have symptoms after a year, but not in the sport world. So, it's because the normal person, the non-athlete, they will maybe rest it out, have crutches on all the time, don't use the ankle. They will still have symptoms after a year, probably, many of those. But in the professional sport, people recover fully. And what I've heard a lot of people working with concussion in Denmark saying that the literature, the studies that has been done on athletes and concussion, we can use that. And I think that is wrong. We can use a lot of it. Maybe they can tolerate more symptoms when they do the exercise and so on, but I think we can use it a lot, actually. So we should, if we just rehab it as a sprained ankle, but that is also being rehabbed wrong in many places.
Of course.
But as a sprained brain, if you can say it like that.
But I think that if the primary care doctor would treat it as a sprained ankle, then the result would be much, much better.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, there would still be people suffering from persistent symptoms, of course, as always. But then you should have these clinics where they can go to if that happens.
Yeah.
Sidetrack as always. But when talking to patients with persistent symptoms, from your experience, what is the most important message to concussed patients?
Hope, I would say. Yeah. Hope, I would say. I've had people recovering fully when they were with me. They have had symptoms for 8 years that has recovered fully. I have helped people having symptoms for more than 20 years to get better. Maybe not always recover fully, but get better. So you can always get better. But I think I've heard a lot of people saying like the brain is plastic. You can always recover fully. And maybe yes, but not everyone recovers fully. Not everyone with a sprained ankle recovers fully, or a dead leg or something like that. Or maybe with a dead leg, et trælår, Danish people maybe will recover.
In Swedish, it's lårkaka.
Okay, yes. Great translation. But you can always get better.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things I think people find quite frustrating when they have concussion symptoms is that what you do, is what dictates how you're feeling. No, it's if you get cancer, you can get treatment, passive, but that's about it. Maybe a positive mindset can have some influence if you survive or not when getting a cancer. But a concussion, if you do a lot today, you will feel worse tomorrow. If you don't do anything this week and the next, then next time you try to do something, you will feel worse. So what you're doing yourself is actually what dictates your progress. But how should you know what to do if you're not told so? So that is also one of the main problems.
To give them hope that it's possible to make a change.
Yeah.
It's not the injury is not fixed or
Exactly.
internal.
Yes, exactly.
But I just want to try, because you and me, we haven't had this discussion before, and I just want to try it out. And we'll cut it out if it goes wrong. Or if you tell me then I'm wrong, then I will cut it out.
Yeah.
No, I won't. But I always think about this, okay, you get a hit to the head, you get a concussion. There are some metrics for telling that it was a concussion, not just symptoms and signs. We have, for example, biomarkers. We have magnetic spectroscopy.
DTI scans.
DTI scans and fMRI. But I'm a bit skeptical to the we'll get into that. But we have some metrics telling that there's been a physical injury, and you have the symptoms. And I when I first were taught about concussions, I were taught that and experienced that most of the people that have persistent symptoms are, as I said earlier, athletes that had multiple concussions. Until I met in 2020 a patient that only had one concussion and never did any sports, and she had persistent symptoms. And that was quite confusing, because most of the literature is done on athletes, and I was just thinking, after so long, is it still a brain injury? I know that it is a brain injury. Concussion is a brain injury, but after many years, should we still consider the brain to be injured, or is it other things that could be driving the symptoms? What are your take on that?
I think you can talk about concussion symptoms, or you can talk about symptoms after concussion. I'm a bigger fan of the second, symptoms after concussion. What I normally do in the first consultation is I screen them for other factors. So there are different risk factors to end up with persistent symptoms. Multiple concussion, yes, is one. If you suffer from anxiety, if you have sleep problems, if you are obese, there came a study out, I think last year, as with pain diagnosis as well. Some of the same
fear avoidance.
Fear avoidance. Many or high intensity in the initial symptoms is also quite a big risk factor. I'm actually working on a post to Instagram right now. Maybe I will finish it on my way home in the train about ADHD as a risk factor. New study came out in March about that. So I'm screening for different things, differential diagnosis, hard to say. That is what I do in the first visit. It can be BPPV, krystallyrsel, as you call it, as one of the things to screen for. A lot of times I find a lot of these things. If it can still be a concussion, so one of the things the concussion does is it change not necessarily that much the structural side of the brain, but the functional. If you look at maybe the functional MRI, as you were a bit skeptical about before, changes in blood flow to different part of the brain, or change in brain activity, you can find differences, but you can also find differences in people with stress, for example.
And ADHD.
ADHD, yeah, exactly. If I take my own case, for example, then yes, there were depression, maybe some fear avoidance too, but then I heard the Canadian podcast, and it still took me quite some time to rehab, because every time I did something new or more than I was used to, I got brain fatigued, or mental fatigue, what you call it, the next day maybe, or the next hour or two. It just took me a long time to remember, and I think that is one of the things. What I see a concussion as is that the concussed brain is not using its function efficient enough. So it uses the energy out before. There is this mismatch between energy and demand in some way, you can say. In a lot of times, I still see it as a concussed brain if people are following this pattern that they do something, they get symptoms, they rest, they get less symptoms, then I would personally call it a concussion. But I remember a client not long ago who she had the same symptoms all the time. She could go partying for 3 days. It would not change anything. In that case, I would not call it concussion symptoms. I know John Leddy, who is one of the famous researchers. He was with Barry Willer. He did the concussion, Buffalo concussion treadmill test, 2013 or 14. It came out, and he has a phrase in a study saying that if very little activity is increasing your symptoms, we should consider other things that are concussion. But I think sometimes maybe it's is fear avoidance or anxiety, something that is holding people back. But sometimes when that is gone, they still have a brain that is not working efficient under all those things, if it makes sense.
It does, because me myself, I don't have an answer to it. I don't. But I like the discussion, because sometimes I say that, okay, you had a brain injury. If there's something still injured physically in your brain, I can't tell. We don't have the metrics for it.
Exactly.
We don't have the measurements. Maybe we do in a few years.
Yeah.
But what I like to tell patients is that there could be other factors besides a brain injury that could be driving your symptoms. The best example, Kristallius, Ehrstein.
That is the best example.
Yeah, that is the perfect example. But you could also have a injury to the balance nerve, cranial nerve number 8, for example. You could have neck pain that could be driving your symptoms. You could have fear avoidance. You could have many factors. So sometimes I wonder, is there still a physical brain injury, or is it something else? I will go to Oslo this autumn, where I will discuss activity as a rehab function, where I will have a kind of provocative title, just to have a discussion. Persistent concussion symptoms. Is it really the brain?
Yeah.
That is my take. Maybe it is, but I love the discussion, because it takes away the focus from the brain and focus more on the person. How do you view? I don't think that persistent concussion symptoms is more a brain problem. It's a person problem.
Yeah, I see it the same way, but I think if I should be a little more... I think what happens, yes, I see the whole person and so on, this holistic approach, but I think that what happens in some cases is in the brain, there happens what you call a central sensibilization. Yeah. And I think that is a physical thing, in my opinion, but you as a person and what you have in your baggage and so on, of course, that influences. But I agree on you that... in my opinion, it does not matter if they come to the clinic, if it is a concussion, if they have had COVID-19, corona, maybe some of the symptom is from that, maybe it is an anxiety, if the rehab is the same. But the rehab is not the same if it is krystallyrsel, for example.
No.
It's quite easy in most people to fix. Then they have a unilateral hypofunction afterwards and so on that can need to be rehabbed. But I always tell people, is this stress? Is it concussion? I don't know. But what you're telling me, you should rehab it this way. And that is what matters to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more for a theoretical discussion.
Yeah. I had a person a couple of weeks ago who came to me with a lot of symptoms. And then I asked, what aggravates your symptom? What makes them worse? Yeah. Emotional thoughts. Yeah. That was the only thing. If you went to exercise, if he was social with a lot of people, no problem. But if he was thinking about his former girlfriend and so on, he get all the symptoms. In that case, I also did the VOMS test for the eyes and vestibular symptoms and tried to provocate some of his symptoms. I could not. Then I told him, this is not concussion. Maybe it still has to be rehabbed, maybe in the same way, but in that case, it was an emotional problem. Maybe the concussion caused that. Maybe he had some risk factors early in life. maybe he was ruminating and so on before. Once in a while, I'm telling them, what we see with concussion is you do something, your symptoms get worse, you rest, they get less. And if you're not following that pattern, the rehab could be different. But in the end, if they're following that pattern, I'm not really differentiate between some cases, even if it is a neck whiplash thing or it is a concussion, if the rehab is the same.
I love the way you're saying this, because it sounds so easy to me that concussion rehab should be so easy. It's like gradual increase of exercise and activity. But sometimes, as you said, you meet this patient where they themselves are not sure. It's something else than gradual exercise that increase their symptoms. So maybe this is what we are for. We are for those people who are not certain about what to do. Is this right for me? For example, I have a podcast. I think it's podcast number 25 or something with Casper Björlin, former professional football player. Yeah. He was my patient, and I can tell everybody he's been telling it in the podcast. So shout out to Casper. But he came to me not because of a concussion, but due to fear of concussion.
Yeah.
So he had he noticed that he got symptoms for anything. He didn't want to move. He was afraid to go out of bed quickly. He's ducking when he's passing through the doors.
I see those patients as well.
Yeah. But he's become much better now. He exercises. He works full time. So, but in that case, you could say that it would be easy to say, well, you've been a goalkeeper in football, you had knees to your head, you've had multiple concussions, that's why you're feeling ill. But it's not.
Exactly.
It's something else.
Yeah.
So that's also why I try to take the focus of maybe it's not the brain. Maybe the brain has healed, but the symptoms can still exist. Like, for example,
with chronic pain, it's the same as
exactly.
well.
Tell us more about it, because you said the word central sensitization. Just to give people a sense of what do we mean in physical therapy when we talk about central sensitization.
Let's say your body is a fire alarm. The fire alarm has to go off in your house when there's a fire, not when you light a candle. And I think if you can call it the sensitivity of the fire alarm, if it is at 10, you just have to light a candle, it will go off. If it is on 1 in sensitivity, you have to have fire all over your house. That is not a good thing. So you want to be somewhere in between. And what happens over time, if you have symptoms, it can also be pain in your lower back, is that the part of the brain who controls or dictates how you react to different activities has become sensitized. So like the fire alarm, it is maybe set at 10. So the original injury, like a broken leg and something like that, has healed. But the brain is feared that it might happen again. So it gives you a lot of symptoms. Maybe that explains it a bit.
It's picking up the signals.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the way out of it is through exposure, so the brain gets safe in doing the things. Being in a crowded place is not dangerous. Maybe you will get some symptom in the first place, then the brain will find out it's not a bad thing to do, and then you get less and less symptoms. But it's, with pain, pain in your shoulder, lower back. For a lot of years, we have this find what's wrong and fix it culture. Where today it's about looking at the whole person, maybe as a glass where it gets filled with different good and bad things, and then it will flood over with water. I see it, I think, as kind of the same way, if it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Usually I explain it with the microphone I have here in the office. Like, I could set the microphone to a lower level that I almost have to shout into the microphone for it to pick up the noise. But I could also increase the sensitivity of the microphone, so I can just whisper in the back of the room. It will still pick it up, and the brain works in the same way when it comes to pain. So maybe even though something heals, for example, the brain or the hernia in the back, or the broken leg, then the brain can still be taught in some way to pick up more signals. Is that how you should?
Yeah, it is. It is. My English is maybe not the best, so I have a little bit hard time explaining it better. I think maybe I can in Danish, but yeah, I think it makes sense what I'm saying. So that is how I look at it. But you can maybe talk about that a central sensibilization is a physical thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not because people get symptoms. They cannot. Not their imagination. They get the symptoms. Yeah. They're real. But it's because the part of the brain that gives them symptoms is oversensitized.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is how I look at it.
Yeah. But looking at maybe not your... because before today, I thought that you were doing sports and that you've had multiple concussions. That's what I thought, just in my case. I know that I suffered for 4 years with persistent symptoms between 2016 and 2020. The first 1.5 years was the worst. So I wouldn't say I was working full time the last year, so I was doing well. But I would still be having symptoms and sleep disorders and a bit of anxiety over the symptoms, because I was fully aware that I was having CTE. So-called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, because I've seen the movie with Will Smith. So I was completely sure that I had CTE. I was sure that I was going to have Alzheimer's before I was 40. I was so afraid of it until I read some articles by Grant Iverson where he had a very nuanced way of looking at it. Well, we don't have all the answers, but what we do know is that not all people get Alzheimer's, so maybe we shouldn't be afraid without knowing that much. So he had a very nuanced way of looking at it, and all of a sudden lots of my symptoms disappeared in a matter of days, because I realized that it was a lot of anxiety from my point of view. How do you look at it from your perspective when it comes to Alzheimer's and the consequences of concussion?
Yeah, I think the concussion movie with Will Smith is a bad movie in that sense. I think we should differentiate between people playing in the NFL, getting hits every day during every training and a match, and the normal person. I think actually there have been a quite big Swedish study looking at people who has played at least one season in the Allsvenskan. I think it was.
Maybe it was. He was in my podcast.
Okay. I don't remember that study fully, but what I think maybe I remembered wrong was the risk was so small. Or do you remember it wrong?
Yeah, I remember because there was a Scottish study on football by William Stewart and his colleagues, where they found a quite enormous Alzheimer's risk.
In that study,
Yeah, and they and Peter Eda, who is a epidemiologist and also an expert in diabetes, I think. So he's not a concussion researcher full time, but he told me at the podcast that they found a lower risk of Alzheimer's in former Swedish Allsvenskan players than they did in the Scottish. I think it was like a 1.5 increase of risk of Alzheimer's, so it was much lower. And he also discussed the reasons for it. It could be multiple reasons.
Painkillers, for example.
Yeah, it could be stuff like rule changes and that the how much they played. We don't know if it's worse or better today, and so on and so on. But yeah,
now I understand. Then I should not say painkillers in that sense, but I remember the Swedish study kind of. But 1.5, is that a lot? Because it's the same. Let's say you have 1 out of 100 people who get a disease. If that risk is now 1.5, it's still relative few people who get the disease. But what I'm saying is that in America, they did this famous study with 111 former NFL players.
And 110 had CTE.
CTE. At the consensus meeting in Amsterdam in 2022, I think the meeting we were in, there were a lecture about CTE, where the researchers said something about that when you have had 4,000 hard hits to your head, that is when the risk increases. And maybe you get that quite fast playing NFL, but not in the daily living. I'm not afraid of dementia or Alzheimer's at all. Maybe I will get it, but right now the evidence is not suggesting it is because of my concussion. But what can you increase your risk is inactivity, physical inactivity, not using your brain, social, what do you call it, when you stay at home and not social active, and so on. So maybe some of the people with concussion will get dementia because of their, not because of their concussion, but the consequences the concussion had on their life. Maybe. But no, I'm not afraid of that at all. I'm not playing NFL. Maybe if I had played in the NFL, but maybe some of the people, it's not because of their CTE, it's because all the symptom was due to some concussion that they had not rehabbed. We cannot at this point in time diagnose CTE when people are still living. Then we normally call it TES, traumatic encephalopathy syndrome, something like that. I'm not afraid, and my clients should not either, I would say, because I think in a lot of, we're not talking, that is not that much talk about Punch-Drunk syndrome or CTE in Denmark, so it's not something people I think fear that much, but some people do, and that can hold them back, as it did in your case. If they think this might be dementia,
exactly. So there should be a balance there between that. Okay, we should not ignore it, but we should not focus so much on it and create more fear than is probably necessary. Is that how you should?
Yeah, at this point in time, I would not be worried about it. There came a meta-analysis out. I think it was last year. I actually did a reel about it on Instagram. I don't remember it exactly. They looked at people who had one concussion and people who has had 0 concussions. And then many years after, they looked at the people. Was it a cohort study? It's not that important. And then they could see that people who has early in their life has had one concussion was cognitive better when they were older than people who had 0 concussion. And that is strange. But they said it was because they looked at, I think it was sport concussion. And the people who has had one concussion during sport, they played sport. And that is one of the best things you can do for your brain. And the other group was less physical active. So if you're physical active and you get one concussion, it's better than not being physical active.
That's a good point. I think that Peter Uero, who was in the podcast as well, he when they were looking at the football players, they weren't just looking at the Alzheimer risk and dementia. They were looking at cardiac diseases and physical activity, muscular strength, I think. And they found, of course, that the people who had done sports were much better fit. They had a better lung and heart capacity, but they had an increased risk of Alzheimer's compared to. So it's not just black and white in this sense.
But we don't know. Maybe to start with 110 out of 111. But we don't know exactly. I think repeated head impacts could be some of the cause for CTE. I think that makes both sense. Theoretical, but we don't know. A lot of athletes at the highest level, they get cortisol injections all the time. They take painkillers. Some of them actually drink quite a lot of alcohol. Maybe they don't tell anyone. So that could also be part of it, and not just the repeated head impacts. Yeah.
There's more to look into when it comes to that. How I view it, most of the patients I meet are patients who only had one concussion. So it's very few times that I actually have these discussions with patients. And when I do, it's like well, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
But in some cases, I meet athletes, and I had this discussion where they ask me, should I stop playing sports?
Yeah.
And when we have that discussion, okay, I tell them, what is the risk of going back playing ice hockey? Maybe he or she has had 7 concussions, let's say. So what is the risk of you going back? And they say, well, I can suffer another concussion. Well, that is the obvious risk, right? What is the risk of quitting? And they tell me, well, I will get depressed, I won't have my friends, I will sleep badly, and so on and so on. So they find out themselves that it's not black and white.
No.
So there's a risk going back, and there's a risk not going back. And you have to make an informed decision regarding that, because we know too little to say that it's obvious that they will get dementia. We don't know that, but we don't know that they won't either. So,
yeah, at this point in time, it's not the concussions; it's more the
repeated head
impacts. That is how I see it from the literature.
Yeah.
That is the problem. Not if you have had 8 concussions and so on. But normally I do not an exercise, but something with people we in Danish call heaven or hell, or in English we translate it. So what is the worst thing that can happen if you continue, and what is the best thing that can happen? And that example you're giving, the worst thing that can happen is he gets 1 more concussion. But the best things is all these things that can happen, the social things, enjoy playing sport and so on. And earlier with the 6, there have been 6 consensus statements in sport. In the earlier statements, a person called McCrory was the main author. And he is not part of those consensus meetings any longer, because he neglected CTE, as I understand it, saying you should not be afraid to hit your head at all. And that is maybe not the right approach either. But I think it's about, I remember a person one time, she did, after her concussion, she was so afraid to hit her head again that she would not go to the subway. There were a lot of people, maybe she will get hit in the head and get a concussion. It's quite rare. So I remember asking her, okay, if you get 1 more concussion, what is the worst thing that can happen? She said to me directly, I will kill myself. Then was a bit stunned. What should I tell her to do? Because, she had 1 concussion. I think she recovered, or almost, but it was hell for her. She could not go through it again. But not going on the subway, not socialize. What kind of life do you have? There is a risk. I can also be killed in a car accident tomorrow, and I think it's a good example. Actually, maybe I'm not explaining it the best way, but what you're losing, if you don't do it.
Yeah, but you're explaining it fully, because some people they choose to miss out on life because they consider it to be worth it. And that should be a receipt of how bad you can feel after a concussion. You can feel really, really bad. But then it's mostly you and our responsibility to teach people the not black and white scenario, to be more nuanced, and teach that person maybe how to look at it. Is that...
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But it is a hard thing to do, and especially in English, I have trouble finding the right words. But I would not be afraid, sending people necessarily back to sport.
No.
Again.
I have a friend of mine. I've been on his podcast. He will come here in 2 hours. I will record another podcast about boxing and MMA, and how they view concussion and brain injury. And I have most of the time I usually tell people that maybe it's not the number of hits necessarily, but it's how the frequency of the hits. So for example, if you have like 5 concussions, maybe it's not dangerous at all. But if you have 5 concussions in 5 weeks or something, that's not good. How do you view that in regards to this?
There is this thing called second impact syndrome, meaning it is a very,
it's discussed.
It's discussed quite a bit, but they have done studies in rats, I think it was. They had some rats, they gave them a concussion, and some rats, they gave a new concussion the day after, some rats 2 days after, and so on. And if they hit the rats in the head at the time where their ATP in the level
was the lowest,
was
the less
10% or some of those rats died.
Yeah.
So after concussion, it's quite hard to measure ATP in the brain. There's a new MRI scan that can do it, but normally you look at something called NAA, N-aspartyl aspartate, and it shows the lowest about, 5-7 days after concussion. So maybe it can be dangerous at that specific point in time to get a new concussion. But maybe there are less than, I think it's 50 examples in the literature, and with 42 million concussion a year throughout the world, the risk is so small. Maybe the people that get a concussion get a new one. Maybe it was not a concussion and they die. Maybe you can die from a hit. Maybe it has nothing to do with the accumulative effect of the first concussion. But yeah, you're right. Maybe if you get them in a small amount of time, it can make a difference. Not if they are spanned throughout their life.
And maybe because what we are talking about, or what I'm mostly saying in my lectures, that it's so rare to die from it. So I haven't even discussed second impact syndrome in like 3 years. This is the first time I said it.
Okay.
So it's not a big discussion. But what I usually mention when it comes to the frequency of impacts to the head is that maybe if there's an increase of inflammatory process, an increase of the actual injury, it doesn't kill you. But if you get too many hits to the head too frequently, then maybe that's what sets up for the long-term consequences. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
What's your thoughts on that?
There is another diagnosis called chronic fatigue syndrome, where the microglia in the brain, the cells that produce the inflammation, also when you get sick, for example, they are overactive. So when they do activity, the microglia will see that activity as something dangerous, and then will secrete a lot of inflammation, and people will, some of people with ME or CFS, as it is also called, is lying in bed all day. So we know that microglia, the cells in the brain that produce the inflammation, if they're overactive, it can be quite debilitating. Maybe that same thing can happen in concussion. There came a study out last year where they have a specific scan that could look at the fluid in the brain, and they find that 95% of the people with concussion has decreased. They think the fluid means inflammation in their brain. So I think that inflammation could drive some of the symptoms. And yes, if you get a lot of injuries in a small amount of time, maybe the inflammation will get accumulated, and maybe I think the microglia can be overactive, like the central sensibilization, and they have a hard time calming down. Because I also have some people that are doing all the right things. They're physically active, their sleep hygiene is good, and so on, and they have a very hard time improving. Maybe there can be some mental part to it. Sometimes it seems to me like there is not. So maybe in some people, if they get many concussions in a small amount of time, it can do something to the brain. But I don't think in the literature we know what it is. Maybe it's inflammation.
Maybe, maybe. Also a sidetrack. I love the sidetracks.
Me too.
But the message to the listeners from your point of view, what would, if you had one thing you could tell people in regards to concussion, what would be the most important message that you would leave them with?
I actually think The short answer is something like find the right provider that has an evident point of view. Not send everyone to me. That is not what I see. But I think rehabbing from a concussion, okay, let's change it. Do it simple, I would actually say. I think rehabbing from a concussion is actually, and I'm not trying to neglect some people, quite simple. If you have a graded exposure, you're physical active, you try to do what you can to sleep better and so on, a lot of people will recover fully. We don't need specific exercises. I know that sometimes you also give eye exercises to people. Maybe it's because the avoidance behavior and doing specific movement with the eyes is part of it, but keep it simple. I think the hard part about rehabbing from a concussion is find the right person to help you, be consistent, and keeping it simple. Because we are not people either, as we has been talking about, will be told to stay in a dark room, or people will do a lot of different strange exercises, eat different things to be anti-inflammatory in their own body and so on. You don't have to do the hard thing. For me, is the Denmark we will, if I should translate it, we'll call it the frames. I don't think that is the right thing, but if I have a pain in my wrist, I know it's quite a long note, but if I have pain in my wrist and I do some rehab exercise, it will get sore afterwards, I will still could function throughout the day. But when your brain gets tired, it's hard to be a good parent, for example. Or maybe you have a very bad day, but you have to go to work. So I think the hardest things is the balance between pushing yourself, but also have time to recover and rest when you need it. I think that is the hardest part about having the possibility to rest when you need to. I remember a single mom with 2 small children, that she could be social. That is a good thing. She would get symptoms, but she was not able to rest. So I think that is the hardest part about getting better after concussion, the environmental side of things in regard to this dosage of activity. But keeping it simple, actually, I would say.
I like your way of saying it, and that's also why if I used to say, if you don't have a bad feeling in your stomach when you think of what you said 4 years ago, then you're doing it wrong. So sometimes I've tried to keep it more and more simple in the last couple of years, and also more and more simple the last couple of weeks even, because as you said, I think that if people treat this as a very, very complex injury, it's a complex it's complex symptomology. It's many symptoms. You can feel bad in
many activities you have a hard time doing,
exactly.
Not just squats for your knee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's complex. But if we treat it too complex, then 1, patients will probably get more scared, and 2, healthcare professionals won't feel like maybe it's not for them to treat. Maybe they will back off instead of intervening. Instead, they should keep to the basics. And I had a lecture with physical therapist a few weeks ago, and I told him, you should know it's really easy treating concussions most of the time, but don't tell anyone that I said it, because people think that we are some kind of gurus that we know so much. We don't. So keep, as you said, keep it simple, keep to the basics. That won't fix everyone, but maybe most of them.
Most of them. And we talked a little bit about the United States with all these subtypes. And in many years in regarding to different kind of pain in the body, it was also about doing a lot of tests for the shoulder and then a specific rotator cuff exercise in this ankle. But the modern pain science shows, no, you don't have to do complicated tests and exercises. Be physical active, use your shoulder, what you can with the pain and so on. That is the way to go. And I think we are lagging behind in concussion, because there is coming quite a lot of studies out looking at different visual disturbances. And I think that maybe in 10 or 20 years, we'll find out the same as with the pain. Keep it simple is the way to go. And with this American wave, people think now, they contact me, can you test this and this subtype, and can you give me a plan with specific exercises afterwards? Sometimes I do some test, but it is more about ruling out other causes of your conditions, like Krustallyrsel. So I think we are lagging behind. We are focusing in the literature or the research a little bit about the wrong things. There's a lot of epidemiology. Of course, from an economical standpoint, it can make sense, but I think we are focusing a bit on the wrong kind of things. There has, from what I know, never been a comparative study where one group of people got these eye exercises and the other people was told to do the things in your activity of daily living that triggers your symptoms. And I think if you did a study like that, it would show, no doubt, that the people who go to the supermarket, even though they get dizzy, will recover more than doing the specific exercise.
Probably.
The specific exercise, in my opinion, is just, what do you call that? It's just loading the brain in a ghosted way. I don't know if you can say it, but people think, you're mislining or aligning, it's called, different dysfunction in your eyes. No, I just think it's about loading. And if you either did the exercises or you were staying in a dark room, yes, you will get better from doing the exercise.
Because you're doing some loading at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we're focusing a bit. We should do a study where they have one people do specific neurooptometrist exercises and one group going to the supermarket looking at the screen. Because what we know from plasticity in the brain, which is also what is in some way is going to fix this central sensibilization, doing something specific helps more than doing something else. So if I want to be better at playing football, I should play football, not table tennis. Maybe some about the coordination of your body from the table tennis can help you a little bit become a better football player. And we can see kids, if they play different kind of sports, it looks like a good thing. But
or maybe they feel that, okay, I can do this in a safe environment, and when they feel better with that, they can do it in an unsafe, for example, football. In that case, it would make sense. But most of the time, you can just try to tell them to do the things that they want to.
Yeah.
If
you get dizzy from being in the supermarket, maybe you don't live close to the supermarket. Maybe it can make sense to have a ball hanging from the ceiling, moving from side to side. But you can also go to YouTube and watch a point of view video of someone working in the supermarket. So this is also a little bit about progression in exercise. Sometime if I were to look at you and after 2 seconds, as I did with my wife when I got my concussion, would get a terrible headache, then maybe I can regress and not look at her and then do 2 seconds where I focus on a pen. But what gives me most life quality? That is looking
probably
at my
your wife.
But when she's not home, maybe I could do some exercise. But
it's hard to tell from today. You had a fantastic episode with Ronnie, right?
Yeah.
Where you discussed this, and it changed my point of view. Also, I started looking at it from another point of view and talking to patients in another way, actually, just from that.
The last year, not to interfere, the last year I have given 0 eye exercises to my patient. Maybe they will see better results if I did. It's hard to say, but I don't see it as something you have to do. To be honest, maybe once in a while I do it, because if I tell them to look more on the wife eyes at home, maybe they won't do it. Maybe if I tell them to do it with a pen 5 times throughout the day, they will. Sometimes I use it, but I don't think in the last year actually I've given 1 eye exercises. that is something you can think about afterwards.
Yeah, definitely, because I think they did a scoping review quite recently when they were looking at those interventions and where they found a high risk of bias in most of the studies, and that they have to, as you said, they have to create a better randomized controlled trial before we could say anything.
Yeah,
and that's what I take with me.
But they did a quite a big study with vestibular symptoms. Yeah. They used the dizziness handicap inventory, I think it's called. Yeah. And they could see that people who did vestibular exercises compared with a control group that did not, they scored better after they did the exercises. But 2 months after, the groups were the same. But so people will say, oh, vestibular exercises helps. But if the control group is not exposing themselves to the things that makes them dizzy, I think the vestibular group will get better. But not if the other group would go to the supermarket or ride the car and so on. But yeah, we don't know exactly. We just know from a plasticity point, doing something that makes sense to you, that is specific to what you want to be better at, you'll be better at. You have played karate, or what you call it, at the highest level. Why can't I beat you in karate? Yeah, because you have...
maybe now you can.
Maybe now, I think so.
Many years ago.
Maybe. But you have trained. Yeah. I think, yeah.
What I like about it when it comes to you talk about vestibular exercises, to me it many times depends on why they are dizzy. Yes, because I've seen many patients who have Kristallus or Øystein or BPPV that had vestibular exercises because of their dizziness.
Yeah, then
it doesn't work. Then it's not.
No.
So it depends a lot on why they are dizzy. But I also like the thing with vestibular exercises is that when you tell them to go to the supermarket, and they do, and they say, I spent an hour there, but how they spent it was like not looking, not turning their head, and when they turned, they did it slowly. They were in the supermarket, so many of them understand that they should expose themselves, but they don't really. So maybe in that case, it would be good to push them in some way to get them through that barrier.
That is how I use it as well. But I haven't had anyone the last quite long time where that was necessary to do. But I understand what you mean, and that is how you should use it, in my opinion, also. I think I had one more thing to say about it.
Yeah, because the question was, what is the message?
The message is keep it simple.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. We'll end on that note, and I would like to say thank you for being here. It was a fantastic podcast, and I knew that when I sent you the agenda for today, I knew there would be some sidetracks because there. But anything else you would like us to say?
No, maybe you can follow me on Instagram.
You can follow. Till er som lyssnar, tack för att ni har lyssnat på ett helt avsnitt på engelska. Men ni kan gå in och följa Morten Karl på hjärnrystelses-fyssen på Instagram. Och jag kommer även lägga en länk här under avsnittet om ni nu lyssnar på Spotify eller vart ni nu lyssnar på. Men även på Instagram så kommer ni kunna hitta länken till Karl. Jag kommer göra ett inlägg om det här avsnittet. Men thank you. Tusen tack, Karl. Eller Morten, fordi du havde lyst at være med i min podcast i dag. Og nu springer vi lige over, begynder at tale dansk resten af den næste halve time. Men tak til jer som har lyssnat, og vi ses i næste afsnit.
Thank you for having me.